This is it, the Pittsburgh Steelers' final depth chart before entering week 1 of the 2024-2025 season has been revealed. But first, before I get more into it, make sure you subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications for everything Pittsburgh Steelers news and updates. Now, let's get right into it. So, this depth chart doesn't have anything too surprising, not too many changes from the first initial depth chart when all those players were still on the roster. But this is after cutdowns. This is the 53-man roster. So let's look at it. Looking at quarterback, Russell Wilson is the starter. He is quarterback number 1. Justin Fields, quarterback number 2. And Kyle Allen is quarterback number 3. Even though Russell Wilson was named quarterback number 1 earlier in the week or last week, it still was expected. When he first signed with the team, and even though Justin Fields was traded here, it was as expected. Mike Tomlin always said pole position, and Russell Wilson remains quarterback number 1. And Justin Fields, even though he's quarterback number 2, Mike Tomlin said his athleticism is too good not to be utilized. So expect him to get some run as well sometimes. Looking at running back here for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Najee Harris is still listed as running back number 1, and Jaylen Warren is running back number 2. So, even though Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris kind of split time on the field, both of them see the field a lot, that is still number 1 running back and number 2 running back. And the number 3 running back is obviously Cordell Patterson, who's a do-it-all type of gadget player. And Arthur Smith likes utilizing him in many ways, so you can see him utilized as well on the football field. Even with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren doing really good last season, you can still expect to see Cordell Patterson on the field sometimes. So, moving over to wide receiver. Looking at the Steelers wide receivers as the starters, it's not really listed as number 1, number 2, number 3, but it's listed as a starting 3. George Pickens, Calvin Austin III, and Van Jefferson. Those are the starting wide receivers. And the backup to George Pickens is Scotty Miller. The Steelers don't show a backup to Calvin Austin. There's a space, so that means that he doesn't have a backup, but obviously it's interchangeable. And looking at the backup to Van Jefferson, it's Roman Wilson. So those are the 5 wide receivers for the Steelers and their position on the depth chart. Now, moving over to the tight end position, Pat Freiermuth is obviously listed as a starter. Darnell Washington is the backup, and Connor Hayward is tight end number 3, and McCole Pruitt, who ended up making this team because of his connection to Arthur Smith in Atlanta, he is tight end number 4. The reason why the Steelers probably kept 4 tight ends this season, in past seasons they don't really do it, but they kept 4, and it was probably because the Steelers and Arthur Smith expect to use 3 tight end packages, just like he did a lot in Atlanta, so you need to have at least 4 tight ends in the roster to do so, and Arthur Smith kept 4 in the Steelers. Now, moving over to the Steelers' offensive line and their listed positions and spots in the depth chart, looking at left tackle, the starter is Dan Moore Jr. That was a big topic of discussion this offseason. Will Dan Moore Jr. still be the starter? Well, to start the season, the depth chart, he is. So he's the starter at left tackle. His backup is Dylan Cook. And looking at left guard, Isaac Seumalo is the starter. His backup is Spencer Anderson. Center is listed as Zach Frazier as a starter. Ryan McCullum is his backup. Right guard is James Daniels. His backup is Mason McCormick. Right tackle is Broderick Jones. His backup is Troy Fatanu. So, those are the starters and the backups and the depth chart for the entire offense. Now, let's move over to the defense, because this is interesting as well. Looking at the backups to certain players. So, looking at defensive tackle, we're going to start in the trenches first on defense. Because we ended in the trenches on offense, let's start in the trenches on defense. So, defensive tackle, starter is obviously Cameron Hayward. He's not going to lose his starting job. Even though he's been dealing with injuries the last few years, he's not going to lose his starting job. His backup and defense tackle number 2 is DeMarvin Leal. And then his backup, defensive tackle number 3, is Isaiah Loudermilk. This is kind of interesting here because we all thought maybe DeMarvin Leal might be listed as an edge and a backup to either TJ Watt or Alex Highsmith at one of those positions. But as of right now, he's listed as a defensive lineman and a backup to a defensive tackle. It doesn't mean he still can't play edge rusher or outside linebacker come the regular season, but this is just where he's listed on the depth chart, the final depth chart. Looking at nose tackle, Keanu Benton is listed as a starter, as expected. Montravius Adams Sr. is listed as his backup. If you remember to start last season, it was opposite. Montravius Adams was listed as a starter, and Keanu Benton was the backup. So how things change after one season, Keanu Benton earned his spot. He proved it as a rookie, and now he's a starter in year 2. Defensive end, Larry Ogunjobi. Dean Lowry is his backup, and Logan Lee, the rookie, is the third string. That's as expected as well. I really do believe a healthy Larry Ogunjobi could really help this team and be one of the best defense linemen on this team and in the NFL when he's healthy. Looking at left outside linebacker, TJ Watt is a starter. He's the guy, no matter what. And Nick Herbig is listed as his backup. Looking at right outside linebacker, Alex Highsmith. He's listed as a starter, and Nick Herbig is listed as a backup. So the Steelers only kept 3 edge rushers. That's why I was mentioning DeMarvin Leal earlier. So that means Nick Herbig is listed as the backup at both those positions, right and left outside linebacker. And if someone needs a break, it's going to be Nick Herbig. Now, if both those guys need a break, that's when it's going to get interesting. Who do the Steelers use? Is it DeMarvin Leal? So, looking at inside linebackers, the starters is Patrick Queen. At left inside linebacker and right inside linebacker is Elandon Roberts. Patrick Queen's backup is Peyton Wilson and then Mark Robinson. And Elandon Roberts' backup is Tyler Makedevich. So obviously Cole Holcomb, he's injured. He's not here yet. It's going to be interesting to see if he ends up being a starter when he gets back, or is he going to be a backup? Because he was a starter to start last season. So would he be when he comes back from his injury, or are they just going to ease him into it? Looking at cornerbacks, right cornerback is Joey Porter Jr., left cornerback is Dante Jackson. Joey Porter Jr.'s backup is Darius Rush, and Dante Jackson's backup is Corey Trace Jr. Now, looking at nickelback or slot cornerback, whatever you want to call it, it is Beanie Bishop Jr. He is the only guy listed, and he will be the starter at that position, just like he earned it through a training camp and the preseason. Now, moving over to the safeties. The free safety is Minkah Fitzpatrick. The strong safety is Deshaun Elliott. This is interesting here because the backup to Minkah Fitzpatrick is Miles Killebrew, and the backup to Deshaun Elliott is DeMonte Casey and then Jalen Elliott. Me personally, I would have thought maybe DeMonte Casey would be the backup to Minkah Fitzpatrick on the depth chart. Obviously, this is not when a game actually starts. DeMonte Casey will probably be the main backup to both of them. But I'm saying, as a free safety listed, I would think DeMonte Casey is more of someone who roams the field than a strong safety who comes up and lays the boom. But that's just my thoughts on that. And Minkah Fitzpatrick, Deshaun Elliott is a starter. If you remember last season, it was between Keanu Neal and DeMonte Casey. Both those guys were listed as starters. So Deshaun Elliott earns a starting job, and DeMonte Casey is the backup this season. As last season, both of them were listed as a starter. But anyway, that is the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Moving over to special teams, this one is quite obvious in terms of who's a starter at each one. You look at punter, obviously Cameron Johnson. The Steelers gave him a huge contract this offseason after they released Presley Harvin III for his inconsistency. They're looking for consistency at the punter position, and Cameron Johnson looks to be that. Looking at the kicker, obviously that's Chris Boswell, been on the team a long time. He's still on the team, and he's going to be the starter until he leaves this team. Looking at the long snapper, Christian Kuntz. He has took over years ago, and he's now the starter once again, as expected. Looking at the holder, it's obviously usually the punter, and it's going to be Cameron Johnston. Looking at kick returner, Cordell Patterson is listed as the starter. Even though he didn't really get any reps in the preseason returning kicks, the Steelers obviously feel comfortable with his resume. and his load of work he's done over his 10+ year career. Jalen Warren, however, is listed as second kick returner and his backup. Punt returner, Calvin Austin III. He's seen some time in the preseason, not a lot. They obviously know what he's capable of, but they were trying out some other players there, like Quez Watkins, Scotty Miller. Quez Watkins did not do well, and they had to go back to Calvin Austin in the preseason, and his backup will be Scotty Miller. So that does it. That's the Pittsburgh Steelers special teams depth chart, and in total, the offense, defense, and special teams. This is it. This is the official depth chart as we head into week 1. So the initial depth chart with all the 90+ players was listed at the beginning of the preseason, and this is the final one, as cutdowns were made, and there's now 53 players on the roster. Anyway, with that being said, that's the end of this video, but let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on this depth chart. Is there any surprising people not listed as starters or not listed as backups to certain positions that you thought would have been there? Is there something that you would change in terms of the listing of the depth chart? Or do you like it how it is? Do you believe everything was listed straightforward and everything was ordinary, nothing unexpected? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And also, make sure you subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications for everything Pittsburgh Steelers news, updates, highlights, analysis, and reports. I covered all, continue to cover all, and until next time, I'll see you guys all later. I'm out. Peace.